Chapter 1 The Messenger. The rustling of loose paper was the only sound to stir the silence. YN flipped through the documents that lay neatly on her desk. Her eyes flicked over the deep blue ink scribbled across each page. Carefully, she memorized each word that had been printed before her, afraid of the consequences that would surely arise if she managed to forget. With curtains drawn and her head buried deep in loose pages, she was lost in her studies. Memorize it. Do not forget the message, she told herself over and over again. Her body was rooted to the desk's wooden chair. She wouldn't move until she could rehearse each message fluidly. It had been 8 p.m. when she took a seat in her bedroom to begin her work, and 11 p.m. when she got up to grab a drink of water. 3 a.m. rolled around and YN still hadn't moved from her desk. Not even the erratic AC unit in her tiny apartment could break the focus that she forced herself into. The loud buzzing was drowned out by the blankets of concentration that she wrapped around her body and mind. But as the flow of memorization swept through YN in those early hours of the morning, when the birds were finally waking and when the sun slumbered at the bottom of the sky, a light buzzing coaxed her out of her focus. I was just getting the hang of this, she groaned to herself. The buzzing continued as YN scrubbed at her tired eyes and willed herself to stand. Reluctantly, she got out of her seat, lifting her stiff legs and moving from one end of the room to the other. Her silver flip phone, a prized possession, shook on its charging port by her bedroom's closed door. Someone was calling her, and it didn't appear to be anyone she knew. Snapping the phone from its port and flipping open its cold, metal face, no caller ID flashed on the glowing screen as she wrapped her aching fingers around the phone's silver body. She only knew of one person who might be bothering her at such an hour, but the mystery caller was not him. It was not Carlo. So, with practiced movements, YN set the phone back into its port and returned to her desk. The caller ID didn't read Carlo, so frankly, she couldn't care less about who was bothering her at 3 o'clock in the morning. After letting the buzzing die out and situating herself back into a state of focus, only a moment passed before the buzzing returned. Of course, she ignored it. And once it stopped, she smiled. But no sooner did it stop did the buzzing return again and again and again. YN crossed the room in 3 strides, swiping up her phone with a scowl. With a flick of her wrist, the phone snapped open, and no sooner was the cool metal receiver pressed into her ear. She had serious work to do and couldn't focus with all of that noise. She was already falling into the arms of sleep and needed to get back to her documents as soon as possible. The call began with a soft click, and YN wasted no time with formalities. "Who is this, and why am I being called so late at night?" She spoke firmly, tapping a slippered foot on her bedroom's black rug. "So, you were ignoring my calls?" the caller said flatly, clearly not in the mood for her attitude. "Oh no. Oh, my deepest apologies, sir. It was not my intention to ignore your calls. It was, my phone hadn't been working. Your ID read as unknown, but I most definitely put you down as a contact in my contact list. Please forgive me. So, how may I be of aid this morning?" YN stammered. But in return, all she received was an eerie silence on the other end of the line. Slowly, YN guided her legs back to her desk and sat, awaiting a response. Butterflies fluttered from within her stomach as a deafening silence ran through the other line of the call. She had screwed up badly by not answering the first time, let alone the second or third time around. This isn't going to end well. Leaning across her desk, YN reached an arm and lifted the edge of her drawn curtains, peering out of her bedroom window and into the early morning sky. The apartment's entire courtyard had been swept away by darkness. Only the early morning birds occupied the vacant space. She wondered why he would be calling her at such an hour. He never called her this early. The mysterious caller, who wasn't much of a mystery anymore, and certainly wasn't Carlo, spoke swiftly. "Get to the port," the husky voice said, startling YN from her thoughts. "Make sure you wear something presentable, and hustle, would ya?" With a click, the caller hung up. Wasting no time at all, YN threw the phone onto her bed and began shoving all the loose papers from her desk into an empty drawer. Her fingers fumbled as she tried to keep the documents as neat as possible, but with the boss requesting her presence, YN had little time to spare. She needed to get to the port quickly. She didn't want to deal with the consequences of being tardy. Leaky Eye Luca is what they called him. He was a mafioso, a criminal with a single leaking eye that made it look as though he was always on the brink of tears. He was also the man that YN worked under, her boss. The low-end mafioso promised her that he would get her out of her nasty debt that she owed to an infamous gang, Passione, one of the biggest criminal syndicates in all of Italy. But it wasn't until the first day of working with the greasy mobster that YN found out what exactly she would be doing and what exactly Leaky Eye Luca would be using her for. She would be a messenger. The job required her to deliver information to the small-time criminals of Passione, the types of messages that couldn't be sent over the phone or through a letter. After hours of memorization, YN would have to deliver these crucial reports verbally, all across Napoli, Italy. A piece of buttered bread sat limply in YN's mouth as she grabbed the door's handle, swinging it open, wide. A rush of cool air tickled her cheeks as she stepped into the hallway and raced down the apartment's shabby corridor. Something felt different that morning. This meeting had to be something of importance, or else Luca wouldn't be spending his time dealing with YN. He never really liked her, but he did enjoy the money she brought for him. Maybe YN would finally get the chance to meet one of the higher-ups of Passione. The higher the rank, the more they'd pay for her messaging service, which meant the quicker she could get rid of her debt. And after her 3 weeks of working for Luca, she hadn't met a single man or woman that outranked her current boss. It was strange that YN hadn't been introduced to any leaders, maybe even deliberate. The drive to the port was mellow. YN let the warm summer air roll through her car as she drove down quiet side roads and sleeping streets. The humid breeze ruffled her hair and tickled her flushed skin. Summer in Italy was hot, day and night, and with the nervousness of being summoned so early in the morning, YN's formal wear clung to her skin. Lined with shipping vessels and small boats, the port of Napoli was packed, even in the dead of night. Slowing her car, YN drifted past early morning workers and flickering streetlights. She didn't bother staring at any particular individual for too long. Instead, her eyes darted across the landscape, looking for anything suspicious or out of place. Paranoia struck the second her car cruised into the port, and she had a gut feeling that it wouldn't be leaving her anytime soon. Finally, YN pulled her car to a stop in an empty lot facing the sea. She sat quietly, watching the restless waves disappear into the ocean. She wanted to close her eyes, wanted to embrace the rhythmic beating of cool water and let the warm breeze lull her to sleep. She was exhausted, but she knew better than to relax. Mere seconds passed before the clicks of opening car doors sounded, followed by 2 aggressive slams. By the thick stench of cheap cologne and the faint smell of body odor, YN knew exactly who had entered her vehicle. "To the city prison," Luca said before taking a breath from his lit cigarette. "And get moving, will ya?" Luca barked from the back seat. YN eased her foot on the gas, circling the lot and driving back out of the port. She stayed closed-mouthed for the full 40-minute drive to the inner city prison of Napoli and remained that way as the men in her back seats puffed on their cigarettes and squabbled with one another. It was Luca with who she was familiar. The man with the brown haircut, close to his scalp, with the pants that sagged below his waist and saggy red shirt that was far too big and too old for him to be wearing. Cuts ran up and down the sides of his clothes, but his poor clothing choice and his lack of style were not what Luca was known for. It was his leaky eye. Always a tear, struck no matter what mood he was in. Luca's right eye simply didn't stop leaking. To Luca's right was a man that YN had only met once before. The rumors that swirled around his name made her glad of that. She didn't want to be meeting him again. And yet here she was. She would have preferred to stay clear of this mafioso as a whole, but with a heavy debt and no other options, YN had to sit tight and avoid his wandering stare. Gustav Bruta, a lanky man with a drinking problem and an aggressive, receding hairline. His pink golf shirt was unbuttoned at his chest, and sweat stains were plastered under his armpits. He wasn't the most attractive man, to say the least, and his poor hygiene and bad attitude only added to his case. "Make sure to park a few blocks away from the prison," Luca said, sucking on the dwindling end of his cigar as he spoke. "I don't want any cops seeing this car's plates." "Yes, sir," YN said simply. Pulling into an empty parking spot beside a vacant-looking apartment building, YN unbuckled her seatbelt and glanced back at the men who occupied her car's back seats. "Do you need me to tell you how to get out of the car?" Luca bit out between clenched teeth, staring at YN as she sat contently. "Hustle, YN! We're walking to the prison. You're coming too." Stepping out and closing the door behind her, YN moved around the back side of the car to open the doors for her boss and his lackey. No thank yous were received, but dirty glances and side eyes were shot in her direction. Everything smelled like the sea. It was a beautiful night, and a salty ocean tang filled the air. The heavy shuffling of Gustav's shoes was the only noise that came from the trio. No one spoke as they made their way down the quiet street. YN swallowed thickly as the group made their way closer to the prison's front doors. "Visitors here," the sign read. "You, Gustav, you wait," Luca said, flicking his cigarette butt onto the sidewalk before drawing his eyes to YN. "And you, come with me." Gustav's slender frame leaned against the rough stone wall. He smiled at YN, his yellowing teeth showing in the dark as his thin lips pulled up toward his eyes. He knew she was nervous. His ugly smile didn't help. Following closely by Luca's side, the two moved past the iron gates of the prison and through the main office's sliding doors. Stepping into the brightly lit space, they were met with a line of police officers who didn't look all too pleased to be dealing with visitors at such early hours in the morning. Calmly, Luca approached the group of officers who stood before them. "We're here to visit Polpo. We're his niece and nephew," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue as smooth as warm butter. An officer with strict posture and a furrowed brow looked the two visitors up and down before mumbling, "Proceed through the security gate. No gifts can be given or received from any inmates or visitors. If any officer deems your behavior suspicious, you will be removed from the facility and detained immediately." YN's heart quickened. She had no idea why Luca brought her to the prison, and she was too scared to ask. After walking through a metal detector and being scanned from head to toe by several officers, Luca and YN walked down a vacant hallway. "Keep your eyes down and be respectful," Luca said quietly. After entering the prison, YN noticed the drastic change in her boss's behavior. No longer was he acting in his usual boisterous manner, but the young man had straightened his spine and softened his tone. He almost seemed like an entirely different person. The further they ventured into the prison, the darker it became. They walked on until Luca paused before a single empty cell. A wall of glass separated the hallway and the cell's interior. There was a mattress and a small fridge, but aside from the simple furniture, the room remained lifeless. "You took your time getting here, didn't you, leaky eye Luca?" The voice that spoke was deep and unfamiliar, seemingly coming from all directions. YN was unsure of where to look, or even who to look at. The cell in the hallway remained empty. Luca and herself were the only individuals to take up any space. Apologies, Capo. Luca bowed his head deeply, signaling YN to do the same. But we tried our best to get here as quickly as possible, he stammered. A husky laugh erupted from the empty cell. YN took a step back, distancing herself from the glass. She didn't know why she moved, but something in her head told her to stay far away from that glass wall. Luca, who's in there? YN breathed. But instead of an answer, she was met with another burst of laughter. A pale fear covered Luca's face. His hands trembled at his sides as he tried to keep his focus on the ground. He ignored YN's question. She had never seen him in such a fearful state. Without warning, the once motionless mattress began to move. It contorted into different shapes as the laughing continued. YN stared, too startled to take her eyes off of the spectacle in front of her. Your best isn't good enough, Luca. The mattress. No, the man spoke. In the once empty cell sat a mammoth of a human being, the same man that Luca had addressed as Capo. YN was familiar with the term, but had never had the opportunity to meet someone who held the position of a mafia captain. A much higher-ranking position than any of the low-end thugs that she had encountered in the past 3 weeks, with her time working for Luca. Clad in a yellow jumpsuit and a rather strange-looking red cap, the massive Capo stared down at her. His eyes were a pit of blackness, and his nose billowed out from his skull at a sharp point. The Capo sat contently in the center of the cell, once empty, now full, trapped behind a sheet of glass. But with the man's sheer size, YN wouldn't be surprised if he could knock down the barrier with his monstrous form. Deliberately, the Capo removed his stare from YN and pointed his eyes towards Luca, setting his large hand on the food slot of the cell's iron door. She hadn't even noticed the hole, but the second that the Capo's fingers took up a place before the empty slot, she backed away for a second time. Luca, come close, the large man practically whispered, and without hesitation, Luca stepped towards the food slot. It took mere seconds for the Capo to reach his thick fingers through the opening and wrap them around Luca's neck. In an instant, the small man was lifted off the ground and slammed against the cell's solid door. So you think it's okay to just go about and hire outsiders to work under my nose? Is that it? Do you think that you can get away with living a double life, Luca? Is that what this is? Luca tried to respond, but no words left his lips. Instead, he continued to kick his legs and pull at the large fingers that wrapped around his neck. YN began to shake, unsure of how she should act, but as clumsy as he looked, the Capo seemed to take notice of her panicked behavior. Luca, it seems that you've brought me a little office lady, all done up in such professional attire. The Capo grinned and took a sharp breath before he continued. You're too young to be stuck with an office job, little girl. How old are you? I'm 19, sir, YN replied in an instant, making sure to keep her eyes pointed to the floor. Please, young lady, call me Polpo. I'm one of Passione's capos. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm YN, she said back. Oh, I know exactly who you are and what you've been doing with my itty-bitty friend Luca here. Nothing in my city goes unnoticed, and no need to be so nervous. I'm a friend, after all. There was no way that YN could remotely pretend to be composed. Her boss remained in the grasp of the giant Polpo, who was a mattress only moments ago. It had occurred to YN then that her work as a messenger might not have been as true as she once thought. So that's why I never met any of the higher-ups, she thought to herself. Luca never officiated me as a real mafioso. I was working outside of Passione. YN felt her knees begin to buckle. She really didn't know why it mattered if she was or was not a true member of the mafia, but clearly it mattered to Polpo. Her heart and her head told her to run, but her feet remained planted on the floor. "Little girl, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the next few moments. Do you understand?" Wyan nodded quickly, keeping her gaze pointed toward her shoes. But when she heard a loud thud and Pulpo cleared his throat, she looked up to meet the capo's stare. His once soft features turned hard, and Luca lay sprawled on the floor, gasping for air. "Has your mother not taught you to look at someone when they speak to you? You're being rather rude, wouldn't you agree?" Pulpo said. Wyan's eyes widened, but she stood her ground as she softly spoke. "You're right, sir. My apologies." "Listen, because I'll only say this once," Pulpo said, leaning in toward the glass as he spoke to Wyan, forcing her eyes to stay on his own. "I've heard all about your little delivery service, and it appears that you're quite good at your job. So I have a little task for you to complete, a small mission for you to carry out, if you will." The capo's eyes pinned Wyan in place. A smile tugged at his lips as he spoke. "I need you to deliver a message to Passione's very own bodyguard squad." Wyan's full attention was on Pulpo, her eyes unmoving and gaze intense. Her discomfort did not rise when the capo's smile grew wider, as she was too interested in the words he spoke. Maybe, just maybe, this would be a faster way to get rid of her debt. "It will be your final message as an outsider of Passione," he said. "You won't be delivering any longer following this final request." Wyan sucked in a sharp breath, but didn't interrupt Pulpo. "Find Bucciarati," he said. "Tell him this." A slip of paper flew through the food slot and landed neatly before Wyan's feet. Picking it up cautiously, she unfolded the small note. In messy writing, Wyan made out a small message. "Traitors are lurking in the pink martini." That is what was scribbled across the note's face. Interrupting her focus on the message, Pulpo spoke again. "Bucciarati is one of my most trusted men. His team needs to receive this message and deal with the problem. Fail, and I'll have you and your little boss's head for your acts of disobedience against Passione." Wyan glanced towards Luca. He was still rolling on the floor, trying to catch his breath. "Where can I find Mr. Bucciarati?" Wyan asked slowly. Wyan's gaze returned to Pulpo, but no sooner did they pull back to Luca, who sputtered out a short, breathy answer. "Lebecchio's. Everyone knows that's where he and his boys go for food," Luca said, standing from the floor and massaging his already bruising neck. "Such an observant boy, aren't you?" Pulpo said, grinning at Luca as he moved his gaze back and forth between he and Wyan. "Well, well, little rabbit, you should get hopping now. It's time for you to deliver your final message." After a rushed drive back to her apartment, Wyan removed her blazer and plopped herself into bed. She had offered to drive Luca and his lackey back to the port, but her boss claimed that he needed a drink and headed deeper into the city. Kicking off her shoes and pants, Wyan laid sprawled on the mattress, thinking about the message. Traitors are lurking in the pink martini. She couldn't figure out what the message could mean. How could a traitor be inside of a drink? Or was the pink martini, in reference, even a drink at all? Still confused from the events of that morning, namely the capo, that had also been a mattress, Wyan closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep. It was going to be a busy afternoon in the next few hours. After all, the girl planned on interrupting some high-end mafioso's lunch. The soft knocking of branches against her bedroom window had woken Wyan out of a deep sleep. Brushing loose strands that stuck to the side of her face, Wyan sleepily sauntered her way out of bed into the kitchen for a bite to eat. A single piece of buttered bread is what she had eaten earlier that morning, and to no surprise, her stomach was not too pleased with the lack of nutrients. Taking a box of oats from her cupboard, Wyan glanced at the clock. 1:32 p.m. is what the time read as she poured the oats into a small blue bowl. "Wow," Wyan mumbled. "I'm surprised I didn't sleep any longer." Dropping the box of oats on the floor and knocking over the bowl, Wyan twisted her body to face the clock for a second time. 1:32 p.m. She was going to miss her opportunity to give Bucciarati the message, and if she managed to fail such a simple task, she didn't want to think about the consequences. Instead, she focused on finding a pair of pants as she hurried back to her bedroom. Wyan slipped on a pair of navy jeans she had cut into shorts, a plain brown t-shirt, and a white baseball cap. She would have opted to have her hair down and styled, but the matted mess that laid on her head could not be fixed without a long soak and a deep cleanse. Tossing her sneakers into the hallway, Wyan locked the apartment door and slipped on her shoes as she made her way down the stairs. Though Wyan had heard of the restaurant that the bodyguard squad had regularly frequented, she had never been to the place. Lebecchio's, the name sounded so familiar, but she had not ever seen what it looked like. So, as she practically jumped into the front seat of her car, Wyan wondered to herself how she'd managed to find Bucciarati, let alone give him a message. The car jolted toward the exit of the parking garage. A beam of sunlight shone in Wyan's direction, temporarily blinding her as it kissed her skin. The streets were busy, but not jam-packed. Wyan slammed a foot on the gas and took off toward the restaurant. She crossed her fingers and hoped that today would be the day that the bodyguard squad was eating lunch at Lebecchio's. Wyan had been driving around aimlessly for over 10 minutes. She eventually pulled her car over and asked an elderly couple for directions, which she cursed herself for not doing earlier. The couple gave her vague instructions on how to get to Lebecchio's, but Wyan was grateful for their help nonetheless. It was 1:53 p.m. when she arrived. Hurrying out of the car, Wyan took in the rather simplistic appearance of the venue. No wonder she couldn't find the place. She had believed that mobsters who were supposedly so high-end would be dining at some lavish bar with skimpy waitresses and a free strip show. But the building before her housed many hungry families and smiling staff, not at all intimidating or what she'd imagined the establishment would be like. Running through the front doors, Wyan grabbed the sleeve of the first waiter she came across. The brown-eyed man nearly dropped his tray of drinks as she tugged on his uniform and forced him to meet her stare. "I need to speak with Mr. Bucciarati right now. It's business-related and very important. Is he here? Do you know him?" "He is here," the waiter said. Before he could finish, though, Wyan took the tray from his hands and passed it to an empty-handed blonde employee who had been walking by. She reluctantly took the tray, and Wyan spun on her heels as she rushed toward the brown-eyed man she had cut off only moments ago. "Take me to him! Take me to his squad right now," she demanded. The waiter weaved in and out of tables, Wyan following close behind. The restaurant, she learned, was very well decorated and had quite efficient staff. Suddenly, the waiter slowed his pace before turning a corner at the back of the dining room and clearing his throat. "Gentlemen," he said, "please excuse my interruption, but Mr. Bucciarati has a visitor." Turning his head, the waiter signaled for Wyan to step into view of the men. Quickly, she stepped forward and took in the group that were hidden around a small corner in the very back of the restaurant. Wyan had to control her entire body, forcing herself to stand straight, not letting her mouth hang open as she saw the group that was sitting in the corner. Teenagers. They were all teenagers. Looking back at the waiter, Wyan raised her brows in question, but the man only smiled and walked out of view, back to delivering trays probably. She had been sent to deliver a message to mobsters, not to a group of high schoolers who were currently shoveling strawberry cake into their mouths. One of the boys who sat at the dining table, the smallest of the group, finished chewing before he spoke up. Who are you?" he said. His unprofessionalism caught Wyan off guard, but remembering the task at hand, she straightened her spine and spoke in a frosty calm. "Hello, gentlemen. I have been sent to speak with Mr. Bucciarati, and—" "Bucciarati isn't here, lady," the boy with a strange hat and what appeared to be a bright orange zebra print pants said. He had cake smeared across his lips, but didn't seem to mind as he took another mouthful. Well, I need to give him a message," Wyan said. "Then go on," The smallest boy spoke again, this time with a piece of strawberry in his mouth. I've been asked by the capo, Polpo, to relay this message to Bucciarati and his team. Traitors are lurking in the pink martini, she recited. Suddenly, all eyes were on YN. The mood in the room seemed to change, turning darker and much more serious. Even the customers in front of the restaurant seemed to cease at their conversation. It was then that YN noticed the man in purple. His vibrant eyes lingered on her as he took in a sip from his teacup. He was the most intimidating out of all the boys, and probably the oldest, but something about his chilling demeanor sparked a curiosity in YN. Setting his cup down softly, the man spoke. "You're not a part of Passione, are you?" His voice was deep, and set hairs on YN's arms standing straight. Unable to think of a smart reply, YN let the words tumble from her mouth. Well, you see, I'm not a member of Passione, but I've been tasked to deliver this message, and he stood quickly, walking around the table and planting his feet directly in front of YN. He was tall enough to make the girl shrink down as he growled above her. The scraping of wood sounded as YN knew that the other mafioso at the table stood as well, to come to her aid, or perhaps to help their angry-looking friend. YN didn't know. Polpo is a smart man, the tallest said, and smart men don't give away important information like that for free. His words were barely a whisper. He leaned in close, strands of his long lilac hair falling around his sharp features. "So tell me," he said, "where did a girl like you get information like that?" I'm telling you the truth, sir. His hand launched forwards, slamming into the wall where YN now pressed her back. She didn't even realize that she had been walking backwards until the cool brick made contact with her skin. The lilac-haired man opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could manage a single word, a stern voice boomed from behind. "Enough! All of you, sit down now!" The voice came from a man in a polka-dot suit, with raven hair cut into a neat bob. This man was different. He was calm, collected, and stern. He didn't have cake all over his face, and he wasn't one of the original mafiosos sitting at the table when YN first came into the restaurant. At his bark of a command, all of the boys, including the tall, lilac-haired man, retreated back to their seats. "My deepest apologies," he said. "I had to attend to a phone call. I'm Bruno Bucciarati." With fluid grace, Bucciarati shook YN's hand as his team returned to their seats. "Abbacchio, what the hell have I told you about waiting to interrogate people until I get back?" Bucciarati said. The lilac-haired man clicked his tongue and glanced up from his seat, mumbling a soft "sorry," before placing a set of red headphones over his ears, clearly done with socializing. "Gentlemen," Bucciarati began, placing a hand on YN's shoulder. "This young lady speaks the truth. She's Polpo's messenger. I just got off the phone with Leaky Eye Luca, and he's confirmed her loyalty." Bucciarati held out a hand, and all eyes were pointed to YN again. "So, messenger," he said, "what has Polpo sent for us today?" YN cleared her throat. "Traitors are lurking in the pink martini." She spoke the words for a second time that afternoon. With a single glance toward each of his boys, Bucciarati and his team stood. "Tell Polpo that the message has been received. We have business to attend to." And without looking back at her, the bodyguard squad left their restaurant, uneaten food still lining the tables.